You notice it first in small moments, not in dramatic betrayals. A person thinks the room has stopped observing them, and something quiet slips out of the face. Not a confession, not a crime, something more ordinary, and therefore more revealing. A glance that lingers too long on another person's failure, a softness that disappears the moment admiration is no longer useful, a tone that changes when no advantage can be gained. The disturbing thing is that character is often most visible when a person believes character is no longer required. I have often noticed that people do not reveal themselves most clearly when they are being judged, praised, interviewed, challenged, or loved. In those moments, the persona is awake. It arranges the face, chooses the words, measures the gesture, and calculates the effect. The person may not even know they are doing this, because the persona is not simply a lie. It is the costume through which civilized life becomes bearable. You also possess one. You know how to speak differently before a stranger. A superior, a child, an enemy, someone you desire, someone you fear, someone whose opinion still has power over you. This is not hypocrisy in itself. It is adaptation. But the decisive question is never whether a person has a mask. The decisive question is what appears when the mask is no longer being paid. Watch how someone behaves toward a waiter after impressing the table. Watch what happens to their patience when the person before them has nothing to offer. Watch how they speak about someone who has left the room and can no longer defend the image that others had of them. These are not accidental details. They are the little doors through which the unconscious walks out. The modern person believes he is revealed by his declarations. He says what he values, what he supports, what he believes, what kind of human being he is. He constructs an identity out of sentences and then expects others to accept the architecture as a house. But speech is often the least reliable witness, because speech is the part of the psyche most trained in self-defense. When a man says he values honesty, you learn very little. When he is caught in a small lie that would cost him nothing to admit, you learn more. When a woman says she is generous, you learn very little. When another woman receives the attention she expected for herself, and her mouth smiles while her eyes withdraw, you learn more. When someone speaks of kindness, justice, loyalty, or depth, do not reject the words, but do not kneel before them either. Words are the banners people hang outside the house. The truth is often in the basement, where they think no guest will enter. Human beings do not merely hide from others. They hide from the witness within themselves. This is why the unguarded moment matters. It catches not only the social mask asleep, but also the inner censor looking elsewhere. What people reveal when they think no one is watching is not always darkness. This must be understood clearly. A person may reveal tenderness when no praise can be earned from tenderness. You may see someone quietly straighten a chair, pick up what another dropped, protect a person's dignity in their absence, return a shopping cart, lower their voice near someone sleeping, pause before speaking, because cruelty would be easy. These are not grand moral performances. They are more important than that. They are the movements of the psyche when it is not bargaining with an audience. I have seen people perform goodness publicly and become irritated when goodness brings no applause. I have also seen people commit small acts of decency with almost an embarrassed secrecy, as though they did not wish even goodness to become theatrical. Here the soul gives itself away in a different direction. The secret act is not always shameful. Sometimes it is the only place where sincerity survives. A person's true relation to the world is often shown in what they do when no one can convert the act into reputation. This is why observation is more penetrating than interrogation. If you ask a person directly who they are, you will usually meet the story they prefer. But when you watch without demanding a performance, another order appears. In a disagreement, observe whether they seek truth or victory. In a delayed reply, observe whether they become curious or punitive. In an awkward silence, observe whether they fill the space with domination, anxiety, contempt, or patience. In a compliment given to someone else, observe whether they can remain whole while another person shines. In criticism, observe whether they hear the wound to their pride or the possibility of correction. These experiences are common, almost boring, yet they contain the great psychology of human character. A person who cannot tolerate another's success in small doses will not become generous under greater pressure. A person who punishes tiny disappointments with withdrawal will not become safe merely because they speak beautifully about loyalty. The unconscious rehearses itself in miniature before it acts in magnitude. Small behavior is not small when it repeats. The reason these moments are so revealing is that they occur below the level of deliberate identity. A person may be careful with their politics, their spiritual vocabulary, their moral principles, their chosen aesthetic, their carefully cultivated sensitivity, and yet still betray the hidden arrangement of the psyche in the way they treat interruption. There are people who can endure tragedy more nobly than inconvenience, because tragedy allows them to imagine themselves heroic, while inconvenience exposes their entitlement without poetry. Notice the person who becomes cruel when the coffee is wrong, when the message is not answered quickly enough, when the clerk is slow, when the child interrupts, when the traffic refuses to obey their inner timetable. These little irritations strip the personality of mythology. They show whether a person experiences the world as something to relate to or something that has failed to serve them. One of the quietest revelations of character is how a person behaves when reality does not immediately confirm their importance. You may have known someone whose public warmth was convincing. Around others, they were attentive, charming, amusing, generous with visible gestures. But later, when the gathering ended, when the guests were gone, when no social reward remained, a different climate entered the room. Their face became tired in a particular way, not with human fatigue, but with resentment that the performance had not produced enough return. They began to criticize the very people they had embraced. A compliment turned into a diagnosis. A kindness became a debt. An invitation became evidence of superiority. It is a strange thing to witness the backstage of a personality that has mistaken applause for intimacy. Such a person may not be consciously wicked. Often they are simply dependent on being seen in a certain light. And when the light is removed, they do not know how to exist without arranging reflections. There are people who do not love goodness. They love being identified with goodness. The difference becomes visible only when the audience leaves. Here we approach the shadow, but not as a fashionable word, and not as a romantic darkness one decorates oneself with. The shadow is frequently dull, bêtu, repetitive, and embarrassing. It appears in the envy one disguises as critique, the contempt one calls discernment, the cowardice one names peace, the hunger for control one describes as concern. When people think no one is watching, the shadow does not always roar. More often it mutters. It shows itself in the private pleasure taken in another's embarrassment, the quick dismissal of someone who is no longer useful, the subtle revision of a story to preserve innocence, the instinctive need to lower what one secretly cannot reach. You may have felt this in yourself as well. There is a moment when another person succeeds, and before your conscious values arrive, something small inside you tightens. If you are honest, you do not immediately become noble. You first become aware. That awareness is already more moral than the performance of purity. The person who refuses to know their shadow must act it out while claiming to have none. This is why the unobserved moment is dangerous for the self-image. It removes the flattering mirror. When nobody appears to be watching, one behaves according to the inner law. One actually serves. Some serve approval. Some serve appetite. Some serve resentment. Some serve fear. Some serve an old wound, though they would never call it that. Some serve order, beauty, precision, loyalty, truth, or dominance. You may discover this most clearly not in the great decisions of life, but in the private rituals that repeat. What does a person do with spare power? What do they do with information that could harm someone? What do they do with a weakness entrusted to them? What do they do when they are bored? When they are unseen? When they believe consequences are asleep? Character is not an opinion about oneself. Character is the pattern that remains when self-description has left the room. I once thought of the psyche as a house in which the front rooms are polished for visitors, while the back rooms contain the habits no one mentions. But in this lecture, the image is more precise. A lamp left burning in an empty theater. The actors have gone. The audience has gone. The applause has ended. Yet under that single lamp, costumes lie on chairs. Makeup stains the cloth. Forgotten props reveal what the play required. This is what the unobserved moment does. It lights the empty theater after the performance. You see what was needed to create the person you were shown. You see the labor behind charm, the exhaustion behind virtue, the calculation behind humility, sometimes even the loneliness behind cruelty. Later, when you return to the person in daylight, you cannot fully forget the theater. Their smile still exists. But now you have seen the room after the applause. Many people fear being watched because they imagine exposure means punishment. But the deeper fear is not punishment, it is coherence. To be truly seen is to have one's fragments connected. A person can excuse an isolated act. They can explain a sharp tone, a cold message, a jealous remark, a selfish choice, a hidden pleasure, a convenient omission. But when these fragments are seen together, they form a pattern. And the pattern is much harder to deny than the incident. This is why people often become angry when you notice too much. They do not merely feel accused. They feel assembled. You have taken the scattered pieces they prefer to keep separate and allowed them to imply a whole. There is a particular discomfort in being understood without having granted permission. It is one thing to confess. It is another thing to be recognized. You begin to realize that much of social life depends on agreements not to observe too closely. We allow people their preferred image, and they allow us ours. At a dinner table, someone exaggerates their generosity, and everyone nods because politeness requires cooperation with illusion. In a workplace, someone speaks of teamwork while quietly positioning blame, and others remain silent because survival often depends on pretending not to see. In a family gathering, one person dominates the emotional temperature and calls it love, while everyone adjusts their nervous system around them. These are not simply lies. They are social contracts. They allow groups to function without constantly collapsing into truth. But the psychologically attentive person becomes troublesome because attention breaks these contracts. Not loudly, not dramatically, simply by noticing. The person who sees what happens after the performance cannot easily return to innocent applause. Yet there is a temptation here, and it must be resisted. Once you learn to observe the unguarded moments of others, you may become proud of your perception. You may begin to believe that seeing more makes you morally superior. It does not. It makes you more responsible. There is a cold vanity in those who observe human weakness only to feel exempt from it. They collect signs of corruption in others while remaining blind to the collector within themselves. If you watch people only to condemn them, you have turned awareness into another mask. The point is not to become suspicious of every gesture, nor to become a private judge seated above ordinary human inconsistency. The point is to understand that the psyche is most honest where it is least theatrical, and this applies to you with the same severity. What do you reveal when no one is watching you watch? Perhaps you are polite in public, but in private, you rehearse arguments. You do not have the courage to speak. Perhaps you present yourself as indifferent, yet check for signs of being missed. Perhaps you speak of depth, but become impatient with any person who does not admire your complexity. Perhaps you value truth, but only when truth does not reduce your self-importance. Perhaps you despise vanity in others because their vanity has dared to compete with yours. These are not accusations. They are openings. The unconscious does not become conscious through self-flattery. It becomes conscious when you can bear to witness the small movements of your own inner life without immediately editing them into virtue. A person begins to individuate not when they become admirable, but when they cease needing every discovered motive to be admirable. The private self is not a hidden monster. Though it may contain monstrous tendencies, it is more often an unfinished parliament of impulses. One part wants to be good, another wants to win, another wants to be loved without being known, another wants revenge while calling it justice, another wants rest and disguises rest as superiority, another wants to belong so badly that it will betray its own perception. When no one is watching, one of these inner figures often gains the floor. This is why unobserved behavior can seem contradictory. A person who is kind in one context can be cruel in another. Not because the kindness was entirely false, but because another inner authority rules under different conditions. Character is the hierarchy among your inner voices. What you do in secret shows which voice has been crowned. This hierarchy becomes visible, especially in relation to power. Give a person a small advantage and watch what becomes licensed. Not great power. Not public authority. Not a throne. But a tiny asymmetry. They know something you do not. They can delay something you need. They can exclude you from a conversation. They can decide whether to answer warmly or coldly. They can make you wait. Many people reveal more through small power than through great power. Because small power feels deniable, they can say they were busy, distracted, misunderstood, joking, tired, merely honest. But beneath the explanation, you may feel the pleasure of control. The waiter, the employee, the younger sibling, the quiet colleague, the person asking for help, the one who cannot retaliate without seeming unreasonable. These figures expose the moral structure of those who interact with them. Where there is no fear of consequence, the soul's manners become visible. A person who is fundamentally decent does not become perfect when unobserved. They may still be irritable, vain, defensive, foolish, hungry for praise. But their private movements do not consistently depend on the diminishment of others. That is the distinction. There are people whose hidden life contains weakness, and there are people whose hidden life feeds on injury. One forgets to be noble. The other remembers to be cruel. You can feel the difference in the atmosphere around them. After speaking with one, you feel the ordinary weight of human imperfection. After speaking with the other, you feel rearranged, reduced, subtly made uncertain of your own perception. When they think no one is watching, such people often practice the very manipulations they later present as misunderstandings. They test how much can be taken. Without being named, they learn the edges of another person's silence. This is why your body sometimes knows before your mind permits knowledge. You notice a shift in someone's tone and dismiss it. You notice how quickly they become affectionate when they need something and absent when they do not. You notice that their kindness has timing. You notice that they praise you in public but compete with you in private. that they listen only until the conversation stops orbiting their injury, that they become morally eloquent whenever accountability approaches. At first, you may accuse yourself of being suspicious. The conscious mind often defends against perception because perception threatens attachment. It is easier to doubt your own seeing than to revise the image of someone you wanted to trust. Instinct is not always right, but it often detects contradiction before the intellect has permission to speak. What you call overthinking may sometimes be the psyche trying to finish a sentence, your loyalty interrupted. The collapse of illusion is rarely dramatic. It may occur while someone is laughing. It may occur during a quiet ride home. It may occur when you see a message they did not expect you to see. Not because the message contains a scandal, but because its tone reveals a self you were never meant to meet. It may occur when a person believes you are no longer listening and speaks with contempt about someone vulnerable. Suddenly, the separate pieces arrange themselves. The charm, the impatience, the generosity, the envy, the warmth, the withdrawal, the moral language, the little punishments. None of them alone seemed enough. Together they become a portrait. This moment is unsettling because it does not always make you hate the person. Sometimes it makes you see them too clearly to continue participating in the version of them you were given. There is grief in this kind of seeing. People imagine that revelation brings liberation, but often it first brings loneliness. Once you have seen the empty theater, you cannot enjoy the play in quite the same way. You may continue to speak politely. You may continue to love in some altered form. You may continue to work beside them, sit beside them, share meals with them, answer their messages. But inwardly, something has moved. You no longer place your trust in their declarations. You begin listening to the intervals between declarations. You no longer ask only what they say. You ask what their behavior requires others not to notice. This is a colder form of intelligence, and it does not announce itself. It simply withdraws innocence from the places where innocence has become expensive. The person who is being seen often senses this withdrawal before anything is spoken. They may ask why you have changed. Though you have said nothing, they may accuse you of distance, judgment, coldness, or pride. What they are really feeling is the loss of your participation in their preferred image. You are no longer providing the mirror at the correct angle. This is why awareness often creates tension without confrontation. The old arrangement depended on your blindness, or at least your politeness toward what you saw. Once that politeness weakens, the relationship must either become more truthful or more hostile. Many people do not want truth. They want the comfort of being misread in their favor. And when you stop misreading them, they may experience it as betrayal. But individuation does not consist in exposing others. It consists in ceasing to live as a function of collective illusion, including your own. The more carefully you observe human nature, the more carefully you must observe the observer. Otherwise, you become merely sharp. And sharpness without self-knowledge becomes cruelty with intellectual manners. Ask yourself what you enjoy seeing in others. Ask what weakness gives you relief because it confirms your story. Ask whose failure secretly comforts you. Ask which person's unguarded moment you have refused to forgive because it gave your resentment evidence. The psyche is cunning. It can use truth in the service of vanity. It can turn insight into a weapon and call the wound it makes clarity. The mature observer does not deny what is seen, but neither does he worship his own seeing. There are people who fear the unobserved moment because they imagine their hidden self is unacceptable. But the task is not to manufacture a flawless private life. That itself would become another performance, only with an imagined audience. The task is to reduce the distance between the performed self and the actual self until less energy is spent maintaining contradiction. A person whose public kindness and private contempt are too far apart will eventually become divided against himself. A person whose humility depends on witnesses will become bitter when unseen. A person whose morality is mostly costume will become exhausted by goodness. The psyche does not tolerate false architecture forever. It leaks. It slips in tone, in timing, in laughter, in silence, in what one forgets, in what one repeats, in what one does when no reward is present. The lamp in the empty theater is still burning. Return to that image for a moment. The stage is empty, but not innocent. The costumes remain where they were dropped. A crown made of painted wood, a saint's robe with sweat at the collar, a villain's cloak carefully folded by a gentle hand. The theater does not tell you simply who was good and who was false. It tells you what each role cost, what each role concealed, and what each actor touched when the audience disappeared. This is the unforgettable thing. Sometimes the most revealing object is not the mask, but the hand that removes it. Does the hand tremble with relief, with contempt, with hunger, with shame, with fatigue, with tenderness there? In that gesture after the performance, the person becomes more visible than during the entire play. So when you notice what someone reveals when they think no one is watching, do not rush to name them. Watch longer. One moment might be fatigue. Two may be coincidence. A pattern is the language of the unconscious. You are not looking for perfection. You are looking for allegiance. What does this person return to when pressure lowers? What do they protect when no one praises protection? What do they injure when no one can prove injury? What do they exaggerate, conceal, repeat, mock, neglect, rescue, punish, envy, or preserve? The answers form a map more reliable than their biography. People often tell you who they wish to be, but they enact who has governed them. To know a person, observe not only their ideals, but their reflexes, and then, inevitably, the same question turns toward you. What does your own life reveal in the rooms where no one enters? What tone do you use toward the absent? What pleasure do you permit yourself in another's fall? What truth do you avoid because it would require you to change a story in for them in which you have been innocent for too long? What kindness do you perform? And what kindness do you practice when it cannot be admired? The unobserved self is not waiting somewhere far away. It is present in the pause before you answer. In the thought, you quickly correct. In the small betrayal you explain too easily. In the mercy you offer without announcement. And perhaps the most unsettling realization is that no one needs to watch for the psyche to be witnessed, because something in you has been standing there all along, quietly recording the difference between the person you display and the person who remains when the theater goes dark.